people have been scanning the surface of a Scottish lake for centuries in search of the Loch Ness monster. This weekend, there is a decidedly more ambitious effort underway to see if there's any truth to the legend.
For nearly a century, the world believed something ancient was hiding in the dark water of Scotland. A long-necked creature, maybe a surviving dinosaur, maybe a beast older than memory itself.
We think it's the first potential sighting of 2025. It's absolutely fantastic. It really looks like something is bulging out from underneath the water. We're still carrying out research and surface watch on the water.
People flew across oceans to catch a glimpse of it. Scientists wasted decades chasing it. And now, after one quiet experiment using only bottles of water, the truth has finally surfaced. And it changes everything. The bottles that broke the legend. In June of 2018, a soft-spoken geneticist from New Zealand walked along the shore of Loch Ness with a small crew, a research vessel, and 250 empty bottles. His name was Professor Neil Gemmell, and he had no interest in monsters, no interest in flippers, and no interest in long-necked photographs. He was interested in water, just water. His method was almost insultingly simple compared to the million-dollar sonar fleets that had failed before him. Every fish, every bird, every mammal, every microbe living in the loch was constantly shedding tiny pieces of itself into the surrounding water. Skin cells, mucus, waste, scales, all of it carrying genetic code. If something was alive in Loch Ness, its DNA would be floating in the water for up to a full day after it passed through. Gemmell only needed to filter the bottles, sequence what he caught, and compare every fragment to the global database of known life on Earth. He sampled at the surface, at the middle depths, and near the bottom. He covered the northern basin and the southern basin. He worked alongside Adrian Shine, the naturalist who had been studying this lake since 1973. The man who had led the legendary Operation Deep Scan in 1987 and built the visitor exhibits at the Loch Ness Center. On the 5th of September, 2019, Gemmell stood at a press conference inside the Loch Ness Center in Drumnadrochit and delivered the verdict the world had waited 90 years to hear. He had identified roughly 3,000 species in his samples. He had run his data against 4 major theories that the public had argued over for decades. The plesiosaur theory, which imagined a surviving prehistoric reptile, was dead. There was no reptilian DNA anywhere in the loch. The giant sturgeon theory was dead. There was no sturgeon DNA. The Greenland shark theory was dead. There was no shark DNA. And the giant catfish theory, which had been quietly endorsed by some of the most respected monster hunters in the country, was also dead. There was no catfish DNA either. But one species lit up his readings at every single depth, in every single region of the loch, in concentrations that genuinely surprised him. Eels. European eels. Anguilla anguilla. They were everywhere. Gemmell had narrowed 90 years of mystery down to a single suspect. But before anyone could understand why that mattered, they needed to understand why this lake had hidden its secrets for so long in the first place. The lake that should not behave like a lake. Loch Ness is not a normal body of water. It is a wound in the surface of the planet, carved by ice along one of the most active tectonic faults in the British Isles. The Great Glen Fault is a 62-mile diagonal slash across the top of Scotland, and the loch sits directly on top of it. The fault is alive. It produced a magnitude 5.1 earthquake near Inverness in 1816, a magnitude 5.0 earthquake at Dochgarosh in 1901 that opened a 500-meter ground crack along the canal towpath, and dozens of smaller tremors that continue to register every single year. The lake itself is 23 miles long. It reaches 755 feet at its deepest point. It holds 7.5 cubic kilometers of fresh water, more than every lake in England and Wales combined. Below 100 meters, the temperature stays at 5 degrees Celsius all year long, regardless of the season above the surface. The pressure at the bottom is crushing. The darkness is total. But the most important detail is the water itself. The hills surrounding Loch Ness are covered in peat, and rainwater drains through that peat before flowing into the lake. The peat releases compounds called humic acids. These compounds stain the water the color of strong tea. Underwater visibility in Loch Ness is often measured in inches. You can submerge your hand on a sunny afternoon and lose sight of your fingers before your wrist gets wet. Sonar systems struggle to interpret returns through this murky stew of dissolved organic material. Cameras are essentially useless. The lake is, for all practical purposes, opaque. This is why a monster legend could survive here for over a millennium. You cannot see into Loch Ness. You can only see what briefly comes out of it. And there is one more strange property of this lake that almost no one talks about, but it explains more sightings than any creature ever could. The invisible wave. Nobody warns you about. In 1971, and again in 1972, the journal Nature published 2 papers by a researcher named S. A. Thorpe, describing a phenomenon called an internal psyche. Adrian Shine has described it for years, but it rarely makes it into the documentaries because it sounds boring on paper. It is anything but boring on the water. When wind blows down the long, narrow valley that holds Loch Ness, it pushes the warm upper layer of water toward one end of the loch. The warm layer pivots like a tilted plate around the colder layer below it. When the wind drops, all that warm water rushes back to find its level, but it overshoots and then rebounds, and then overshoots again. The lake sloshes back and forth internally for weeks at a time. From the surface, you cannot see this happening. What you can see is the result. The internal psyche drives slow-moving columns of water at the surface, sometimes against the prevailing breeze. A long, dark hump appears to glide across the water in the wrong direction. There is no boat. There is no wind that explains it. Witnesses watch it for 30 seconds, sometimes a full minute, and then it dissolves and disappears. Adrian Shine has said the psyche alone is enough to rationalize an experience into a Loch Ness monster, especially when the surface is glassy calm and the brain has nothing to compare it against. This is why most credible sightings happen on still days. The Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, which ran continuous watches from 1962 to 1972, came to call those conditions Nessie weather. They knew the patterns matched the psyche, even if the public never quite caught on. But the psyche is only part of the story, because the lake under your feet is also moving in ways the human eye was never designed to detect. The fault that roars. In the year 565, an Irish missionary named Saint Columba was traveling through the Highlands. According to a biography written about 100 years later by a monk named Adomnan of Iona, Columba came across a man who had been killed by a water beast in the River Ness, the short river that drains the loch into the Moray Firth. Columba commanded one of his followers to swim across, and when the beast rose to attack, the saint made the sign of the cross and ordered it to retreat. The creature obeyed. For centuries, this was treated as a colorful piece of medieval Christian folklore. But in 2014, an Italian geologist named Luigi Picardi pointed out something nobody had noticed in the original Latin. Adomnan describes the beast emerging cum ingenti fremitu, which translates as with loud roaring. Picardi argued that this was not the sound of an animal at all. It was the sound of an earthquake on the Great Glen Fault, accompanied by a sudden release of gas through the lake bed, producing a violent surface disturbance that medieval observers naturally interpreted as a creature. This is not as strange as it sounds. The fault under Loch Ness is so active that the modern Kessock Bridge in Inverness was built with 3-meter-long, 2.5-ton hydraulic seismic buffers at its northern abutment, designed to absorb sudden ground movement. When the Lisbon earthquake struck Portugal in 1755, 1,300 miles away, the shaking traveled all the way to Scotland and produced a recorded cyclone on Loch Ness. The lake responds to the planet in ways no other freshwater body in Britain does. Bubbles rise, water roils. Surface fronts appear out of nowhere. The fault is constantly whispering to the loch above it. So now we have a deep, opaque, peat-stained lake, sloshing internally for weeks at a time, sitting on top of an active geological scar that occasionally releases gas through its floor. Add to all of this an enormous population of slimy, serpentine fish that nobody had properly accounted for until the year 2019, and suddenly the witnesses make a lot more sense. The eels were always there. European eels begin their lives in the Sargasso Sea, somewhere between Bermuda and the Caribbean. The larvae drift on the Gulf Stream for 7 to 11 months before reaching European coasts as transparent glass eels. They migrate up rivers as elvers and settle into freshwater lakes for anywhere between 6 and 20 years, sometimes far longer. When the time comes to spawn, they transform into silver eels, swim back down their rivers, cross 6,000 kilometers of open Atlantic, and die after laying their eggs in the same warm sea where they were born. Most of them, anyway. Some never go. Some stay in the fresh water they grew up in. They keep eating. They keep growing. And because they never spend the enormous energy of reproduction, they can keep doing this for an exceptionally long time. The most famous example is a Swedish eel named Alö, who was dropped into a well in the village of Brantevik by an 8-year-old boy in 1859 and was found dead at the bottom of that same well on the 7th of August, 2014. If the dating is correct, the eel had lived for 155 years. Eel experts have called the figure plausible but unverified, since the otoliths needed to confirm the age were lost during retrieval. Alö was only 53 centimeters long when she died, with abnormally enlarged eyes from a lifetime in darkness. Loch Ness, with its constant cold temperature, its endless food supply of salmon and trout, and its lack of natural predators large enough to threaten an adult eel, is the kind of environment where a stay-behind eel could live for an extraordinarily long time. Gemmel's data did not measure the size of the eels in the loch. It only confirmed that there were a lot of them. He told reporters that while a 4-meter eel would be well outside the normal range, he could not rule out the possibility based on his findings. A statistical paper published in 2023 by Flo Foxen in the journal JM1R Bio used historical catch data to estimate the probability of finding a 1-meter eel in Loch Ness at roughly 1 in 50,000. Possible but rare. The chances of finding something significantly larger drop toward 0. So the giant eel theory is not a guaranteed answer. It is a strong candidate that fits much of the eyewitness pattern, particularly the descriptions of long, undulating, serpentine bodies moving below the surface. But not everyone agrees with Gemmel's conclusion, and the most stubborn objection comes from the man who has spent more time staring at this lake than anyone alive. The man who refused to believe. In 1991, a 28-year-old man from Dorset named Steve Feltham sold his house, quit his job, ended his relationship, and drove 600 miles north to live in a converted mobile library van on Dorez Beach. He has not left. As of today, he holds the Guinness World Record for the longest continuous Loch Ness monster vigil in history, more than 33 years and counting. He sells small clay Nessie figurines to tourists to support himself, and he watches the water every single day with the same pair of binoculars he brought from home. In July of 2015, after 24 years of full-time observation, Feltham announced his best theory. He believed the Loch Ness Monster was a Wells catfish, a freshwater giant native to continental Europe and capable of growing to nearly 9 feet in length. Victorian aristocrats had stocked British lakes with these fish in the late 1800s for sport, and Feltham calculated that the population would have been reaching maturity right around the time of the Aldie Mackay sighting in 1933, the surge of George Spicer reports, and the famous surgeon's photograph of 1934. Feltham said the catfish theory ticked most of the boxes from eyewitness descriptions, even if it did not tick all of them. When Gemmel's eDNA results came back in 2019 showing 0 catfish DNA, Feltham did not give up. In a Saga magazine interview in 2023, he was still calling the catfish his front runner, arguing that a small surviving population could explain the dwindling rate of modern sightings without leaving enough genetic traces to be detected. Adrian Shine, on the other hand, has reached a much quieter conclusion after 50-plus years of working the loch. Shine believes the overwhelming majority of sightings are boat wakes, internal seiches, swans, otters, and waterbirds with their long, elegant necks. He has said publicly that there are indeed long-necked creatures on Loch Ness, and we call them swans. He believes any large, unexplained sonar contacts are most likely seals that occasionally enter the loch through the River Ness from the sea. 2 men, same lake. 2 completely different conclusions. Both have given their lives to the question, and neither of them is fully wrong. What Nessie really is. The honest truth, the one that nobody wanted to hear because it is more interesting than either side's tidy answer, is that the Loch Ness Monster is not one thing. It is the convergence of 5 overlapping forces working on the same body of water at the same moment. The first force is biological. There is a thriving population of European eels in the loch, almost certainly including some unusually large individuals, with serpentine motion that perfectly matches the most credible eyewitness sketches. The second force is hydrodynamic. Internal psyche waves drive slow surface humps across the water for weeks after every windstorm, often moving against the breeze in ways that defy ordinary intuition. The third force is geological. The Great Glen Fault releases gas, generates microquakes, and produces surface disturbances that have been mistaken for living creatures since at least the year 565. The fourth force is optical. Peat-stained water with visibility of inches makes scale and depth impossible to judge, especially on calm days when the surface acts like a black mirror. The fifth force is cultural. Once Alex Campbell printed the word monster in the Inverness Courier on the 2nd of May, 1933, every ripple, log, deer, salmon, otter, and trick of light became a candidate for something extraordinary. Gary Campbell, who maintained the official Loch Ness sightings register from 1996 until handing it to his daughter Paige Daly in 2024, recorded over 1,100 sightings across his tenure. 2023 saw 10 accepted reports. The first half of 2024 produced just 1. The decline is not because the creature is going extinct. The decline is because every tourist now carries a high-resolution camera in their pocket, and the humps almost always turn out to be waves, and yet a small number of loose threads still refuse to disappear. The 3 unexplained midwater sonar contacts from Operation DeepScan in October of 1987, all larger than a shark and smaller than a whale, vanished before the boats could return for a second sweep. The roughly 20% of Gemmel's DNA reads that could not be matched to any known species sit in the data, almost certainly representing unmapped microbial fragments, but technically still unidentified. The rhythmic, pulsing recording captured by Alan McKenna's hydrophone during the Quest expedition of 2024. A sound he says he had never heard before in any of his recordings has yet to be explained. The mystery has not been deleted. It has been narrowed dramatically. There is no plesiosaur. There is no surviving prehistoric reptile. There is no giant unknown species lurking at the bottom of the lake. The chemistry, the biology, and the genetics have all closed those doors. But the loch itself, the dark, cold, peat-stained, fault-straddling, eel-filled, psyche-driven, gas-releasing crack in the Earth's crust, is still producing its own monsters. It produces them every time someone parks at the 7-Mile Stone, looks at the water, and feels something move at the edge of their vision. It always will. The Loch Ness Monster turned out to be real. It was just nothing anybody expected. It was the lake itself. What do you think Nessie really is after everything you have just heard? Drop your honest answer in the comments below and tell us if science has finally solved the mystery, or if you still believe something is waiting down there.